Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, and during the games I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. And today we have a Vienna, but we do not have the Vienna Gambit, which would occur after knight to f6 and f4. We have the Max Lang defense, which we actually had in the previous episode of the speedrun. Playlist will be linked below. And so we're going to play bishop to c4, and kind of what we want to go for now is we still want to play f4. f4 is still the idea, but we're going to have to build it up a little bit more slowly. Basically, the idea is that if black plays normal moves like knight to f6, we go something like d3, f4, knight to f3, and we basically open our dark square bishop up first so that if takes, we can take with the bishop. But our opponent goes bishop to c5, and of course this looks very natural. I go pawn e4, he goes pawn e5. I go knight c3, he goes knight c6. I go bishop c4, our opponent goes bishop c5. And this leads to some incredibly interesting lines after queen to g4. Of course, white moves first in chess, so we're one tempo ahead. My opponent, of course, cannot match the move queen g4 because that would hang a queen. What's the point? What's the point of this move? Very simple. We're attacking g7. Because the bishop used to be on f8 and used to defend that square. Now, you may be asking, well, why can't black play queen to g5 in this position and go after the g2 pawn? Well, the problem is, if queen to g5 here, we probably just play something like knight to f3, and after queen takes g2, rook g1, and queen to h3, white has things like bishop f7, king f7, and knight to g5 check, picking up the queen, as an example. The difference here is that if black plays knight to f6 and we take, there is no rook to g8 because our bishop's already on c4, so we would have mate on the f7 square. That's the big difference. And our opponent goes queen to f6, which seems to solve all of his problems. He defends the g7 pawn, and he counterattacks on f2. The move for white here is knight to d5. We attack the queen and we go, look, you can take f2. You can go ahead. I will go king d1, and there is no queen to f1 mate because we control this square. And my pieces are going to barrel towards your king, and I'm trying to claim that we actually have the more potent attack here. This is one of the sharpest lines in the Vienna, and if you want to play the Vienna, you do have to memorize these lines to an extent, but of course, as I preach in so many of my videos, understand the opening, understand why we're playing the moves we're playing, and hopefully, as I think I've been doing so far, I should be able to explain exactly why we're doing what we're doing. And this is risky. Don't get me wrong, this is risky, because our king on d1, it may be safe for now, but, I mean, moves like d6 open up the black bishop, for example, like once the queen goes to f2, and we have to be very careful about this diagonal and getting just mated. If the queen ends up taking on g2, our rook could hang in some lines. It's very, very scary, but it's scary for both sides here. However, because I've done my opening preparation, right, like I know what I should be going for in a lot of these lines, I know that white is better, which is a massive advantage to me, simply because I know white is better in this position. And after queen to f2, king d1, I know white is better. And so I can look for the ways to prove said advantage, if you get what I mean. And then there's also lots of concepts that I'm very aware of. For example, I know that there's ideas of knight to h3, trying to force the queen to d4 and playing moves like d3 to threaten c3, trapping the queen. I'm aware of lines of like knight to h3, queen here, d3, d6, opening the bishop up against my queen, queen f3. And in some lines, after bishop takes h3, rook f1 is actually a good option to make sure the queen can't return to f2, so the queen remains trapped and create counter-attacking threats, even though the bishop is completely hanging and it just took my knight. Now, will that happen in that exact move order? Probably not. Probably not. But you're aware of the ideas, and then you can apply them where you deem it necessary. This is really what I believe is the best way to try and learn openings. And there's so many things black can do here. There really are. Moves like h5 exist. Moves like knight to f6 exist, which is what my opponent plays. I think we can go ahead and take on g7, though. I'm pretty sure I've faced this before. Let me just think 1 second. Yeah, we should take. And things are very tense, because again, we need to be very careful about our f1 square. Because if something like knight takes here, if we were to take, of course we wouldn't take, but if we were to take, then queen f1 would be mate. Do not forget about that. We also have to be aware that with the knight on f6, it blocks the queen's defense of f7, so we do have potential mating ideas on the f2 square. The rook is also under attack, the knight is under attack. We still defend the g2 square, because if the queen gets to g2 and takes on h1, we could have some serious problems on our back rank. Knight to h3, we can kind of play at any point. Not any point, but like, it exists in a lot of lines to kick the queen out and open our rook up to the f-file to get our rook into the game. So this is very, very complicated, and you have to be very, very careful as to how you navigate this position. But this is also one of the most interesting and enjoyable lines in the Vienna. A lot of you might be thinking, what about rook to g8? Counter-attacking my queen. And if I move my queen, then am I not just hanging the g2 square? Yeah, but after rook g8, we could have taken on f6 with check, which would have been the key difference. Now my opponent takes on d5 with the knight. Of course we know that bishop takes hangs mate in 1, so we can't do that. We could take with the pawn, which would, of course, just take the piece. And we also attack this knight. If we take with the pawn as well, both the knight and the rook are hanging, and there is no rook to g8. I can also consider taking on h8 immediately. And after king to e7, maybe then taking here. And trying to get the knight to move so I can take on e5 with check. My only problem is if I take on h8 and king e7 and I do something like this, I might be vulnerable to moves like queen to g2. Going after my rook and then my knight. So my instinct tells me that it's better to take on d5 with the pawn. And if something like d6 trying to open the bishop up, then I think we probably just take the knight and we renew threats on the f7 square because we reopen the bishop. And for the time being, our queen still controls this g4 square. Again, these lines are incredibly complicated, so complicated, and there's so many different options. You could even consider a move like knight to h3. That wouldn't be ridiculous. Now, I think that knight to e3 may pose a problem if we were to go knight to h3, because that comes with check, we have to respond to it, and then our pawn structure gets really messed up around our king, because this pawn really wants to go to d3. I think this makes sense, though. I mean, if a move like knight to d4 is played, then I assume we just take, and if bishop to f8, then the bishop is just not doing anything, and we can take on e5 anyway. And if here, 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 and king here, then we just take on e5, I assume. Everything comes with a tempo, which is crucial, so that queen g2 cannot be played. So I'm going to take on d5. My opponent may be considering the move knight to a5, which would be a very interesting idea, to try to win my bishop and remove my bishop's defense of the f1 square, which is perfectly reasonable for black to try and do, because again, queen f1 would just be mate. My king is not safe. It is barely hanging on. Like, I know the position is better for white from here. I know this is better for white, but I've got to prove it, and I've still got to be very, very careful, because one wrong move and the game is over. But then the same can be said for black, because look how weak black's king is. These kinds of positions really do hang by a thread. And the problem is, not the problem, but the theme is that, like, both sides need to keep attacking. Because if black starts to curl up with a move like rook to f8 maybe, after I take here, black probably loses all his momentum. And he's probably just losing. Knight to h3 should also be considered. Maybe knight to h3 first, if rook f8 actually, attacking the queen. If queen d4... I don't know, actually. Because then taking doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Again, these positions are very complicated. Maybe I should be fine with giving up my knight like this, so I can get my rook into the game. That might be a decent enough option. Yeah, rook f8, the more I look at it, seems like the only move for black. And black will go down a piece after I take the knight. At the end of the day, two of his pieces are hanging, and he can't save both of them. And knight to a5, counter-attacking, of course, doesn't work, because I'll just take the rook, and then I'll take on e5, and I should be completely winning. Even with a move like queen e2, that might just shore everything up. And force, and potentially force a queen trade. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far and like my style of commentary, please drop a like and subscribe so you can get notified of my new videos when they drop, and they'll show up more on your homepage, etc. So you can continue to improve at chess. And if you're watching this purely for entertainment, then you can also be entertained. So it's a win-win. Also helps to keep me motivated. I'm also realizing that if this knight moves, the f1 square is defended for my rook to counterattack on. Although I suppose if knight to h3, the queen will have to move anyway, and my bishop will be under attack. My opponent goes rook f8, and I think that's smart. I'd love to play knight to h3 first, but I think this is a little bit of a problem because our bishop is under attack. So I'm leaning more towards just taking. And I suppose if my opponent takes back, I can actually just consider the move queen to e5 check. That's not ridiculous. And I do have to be very, very careful about bishop to g4 check. I know. I also have to be careful about queen to g2. I am aware. But I think we should be fine. I think we should be fine. So, yeah, let's take. Let's take. And I mean, I don't think I've got any other option, realistically. And again, it does help that I know that this position, not this position particularly, but I know this position is better for white. d6, that is not a move I considered. That's a really interesting move. Not taking the pawn back, because, I mean, if I take, then so what? But actually opening up the bishop and defending the e-pawn, that's a really smart move. A really smart move. Okay. Good find. Good find. Now, we're up a piece, but our king is here. So, you know, we've got a lot of work to do. Knight h3 is tempting. Very, very tempting. And if my opponent takes and takes, he could queenside castle and try to, and if I take, just go king b8 and use the pawn as an umbrella pawn, and then try to launch a big attack on me. I could consider a more passive option of knight to e2, which wouldn't be ridiculous, just blocking up this not that diagonal, this diagonal. But then I don't have rook to f1, although I could go queen to g3 to kick the queen away. And then there's no queen to d4 either, counterattacking my bishop. There'd also be no queen f4 or queen h4 counterattacking my bishop. So queen e2 looks very tempting. Again, there's no rook g8 ideas, which is very useful, because that would be problematic. If the bishop can't develop to g4, I mean, developing here makes no sense. I mean, take, and I mate you on d7, which is one of the downsides of leaving my pawn on c6. Yeah, the more I look at it, the more I like this move knight e2. I do think that this might be the way to go, and I'm going to play it. Now our rook controls the f1 square. g2 is still defended. g4 is still defended. And we're defending a few important squares in our... Well, f4 less so, but d4 is definitely an important square. Because typically the queen retreats to d4 if it gets kicked out so that it can counterattack my bishop. However, now, if I were to play a move like queen to g3, which is probably what I want to do, putting pressure on the queen, the options it has to retreat are a little bit more limited. If it has to go to a square like f5, for example, then it blocks in its own bishop. And I could even consider a move like queen to f3 there. My opponent takes on c6. Okay, that feels like a waste of time, though. I don't think black has time to be taking there. I mean, I understand. He probably wants to develop his bishop, but is concerned about me taking, and then he's got to move his rook, and then he can't castle queenside. But as I said earlier on in the game, attack, attack, attack. You need to attack. And that is not attacking. Yeah, I assume he might want to go for a move like d5, which is completely reasonable. But I'm up a pawn. Sorry, not a pawn, a piece. So queen g3 looks like a very nice move. And then, I mean, if the queen retreats, I can even consider things like d4, maybe? Opening up my dark squared bishop with tempo. That would be a potential option. I mean, obviously, I'd love to go rook f1, but I can't. So queen g3 does look like the move I want to play. Don't be greedy and start grabbing pawns, bishop g4, and then we're in some trouble. Probably. So queen g3, I mean, I don't see a reason not to play this. So I'm going to play it. Again, there is no queen d4, which is very useful. Also, if the bishop had developed to f5 here, not only do you take your eyes off of b7, but after queen g3, your queen loses her escape squares, so she would just have to trade herself off for my queen, which is obviously a big win for us because we're up a piece. Now my opponent's got a pawn for the piece, and he can try and take some space in the center to try and compensate for it maybe, but I don't think it works. d4 does look really tempting here. Reason why is if my opponent takes with the bishop, then of course we just take and go rook to e1 check. Probably. So taking with the bishop makes no sense. So taking with the pawn is probably forced, because if you retreat your bishop, then I assume I just take. Or I don't even have to. But the point is that I want to play the move bishop g5 and get my bishop out and about quickly. And then I can try and play a move like rook f1 potentially. It's a little bit risky. Queen f3 should also be considered. Maybe queen f3 is actually stronger, because not only do we offer a queen trade, but we also attack the c6 square. And this queen cannot move to a square that avoids a queen trade and defends c6. And if we take on c6, then I mean, I assume black is completely lost. Then we could even incorporate moves like d4 to play bishop to g5 and completely smother the king. So I think queen f3 has to be the move. And if takes, I mean, okay, you ruin my structure a little bit. Maybe you can go rook g8, but I'll just go knight to g3 and clog everything up, and I'm up a piece. So a queen trade, of course, completely favors me. Yeah, queen f3 looks like a very, very strong move. So I'm going to play it. And the thing is, I was saying earlier in the game that I'm not going to be recommending you to memorize a bunch of moves. I'm going to be trying to explain the concepts and understanding the opening. I don't think I've ever had this position before. I think previously I've made the mistake of taking the rook, which I think is a mistake, but I've never had this position. I'm just playing off of knowing some of the opening ideas and trying to utilize them as best as I possibly can. So I'm very much in the same boat as you guys. I don't just like tell you guys don't memorize loads of moves, just understand the concepts. No, I do it myself. I do it myself because I genuinely believe that is the best way to learn. d5 from my opponent. It's a good move, right? He trades queens with me, which should benefit me. But the game's not over. My king is very weak, and I'm still lacking development. Now, I'm tempted to play d4 to counterattack. And if takes bishop d3, I open up my dark squared bishop. I'd sacrifice a pawn for my development. Oh my god, why is my computer lagging? Bruv, it's literally just chess. This is not complicated. Okay, there we go. d4 is the move I want to play. Of course, if takes, then we're absolutely fine. If d4 bishop takes, then I'm just going to take the bishop. If you take here, then I'll just move my knight back, and I sack a pawn, but these pawns are horrific anyway. and I also open up my dark square bishop. If d4, bishop takes, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop d3, I sack a pawn, but I think I'm in good stead. We attack h7, we prepare rook g1. If here, and he just takes with the pawn, then bishop d3, I clog up the center, and I also open up my dark squared bishop, and I target h7, and I prepare something like, you know, this maybe. I also block off this bishop, which is controlling the g1 square. So I really like the look of the move d4. And I've got to be careful that I'm not sacking too many pawns, of course. Like, at the end of the day, I'm only up a piece, and I am down a pawn. Be aware of that. So if I just gave up 2 pawns here, technically would be on equal material. I still think that I should probably be able to convert this position, but I don't know, I just don't like the look of bishop d3 in that position, because if bishop d3, not here, bishop d3, I mean, what am I doing? After a move like rook g8, the rook is going to invade on g2, and I can't get my dark square bishop out, whereas in this scenario, my dark square bishop can get out. This makes a lot of sense. I think rook g1. Again, I don't really want to be too pawn hungry, but how does black punish me for taking that pawn? Because there's no rook g8. If here, maybe that's the idea. And then I can't play... Oh, no, I can play rook g1 because my knight controls that square. Does rook g1 immediately make more sense, though? Because black can't challenge me then. I do like that idea. And you may be concerned about this, but this pawn isn't going anywhere. I mean, it can't move. If I move my bishop, then it can move, but I can always play something like rook g3 to move my rook off of the firing line with tempo against the bishop. Also, actually, if I take this, then just bishop g2, and that's a little bit concerning. So yeah, let's not allow any of that. Let's just go rook g1. And also knight to f4 will come for tempo on the bishop if I want to play it in the future. I might not want to, but it's a bonus. It's a bonus. And now, how do we win this position? So I'm down 2 pawns, but I'm up a knight. My knight isn't very impressive, admittedly. So I do have to be accurate here. How do I win this? Well, I need to make the most of my pieces, and I need to try and win a pawn or 2 if possible. I think a move like bishop to f4 or bishop here, or even bishop g5 makes sense. Bishop d2 is a bit too passive. I want to get my bishop out, move my king, and connect my rooks. And I can meet bishop to b4 with a move like c3, potentially. Or if my rook has already moved, maybe I can dip the king to c1. Don't know. A move like a3 seems a bit too slow. Don't give a check for the sake of it. That just allows black to open up his bishop, which is exactly what he wants to do. Also be wary of moves like c5, c4, counter-attacking and trying to use his extra pawns to his advantage, because these are his extra pawns at the end of the day, like these two. So don't allow your opponent to use their advantage if you can avoid it. I think I like this line, where, yes, I allow the move bishop to b4, but after here, bishop back, I can probably go knight to d4, and again clog it up. h7 still hangs, and I'm just offering rook trades, which benefit me, obviously. This bishop isn't doing anything. So I'm going to play it, bishop h6, and I'm just going to ask the question. Now, he may not go rook to g8. He may go rook to h8 if he's particularly scared of losing the h7 pawn. He goes for it. This feels wrong, though. This feels wrong. And again, it gives me time to do what I want to do. Now, what is it that I want to do? what actually is my plan? That is yet to be realized, because it's not obvious. Bishop g7 is very tempting, though, because rook g8 can be met with bishop h7, and the rook is almost trapped, has to go to e8. But if my bishop moves, then d3 is going to be a little bit of an issue. So maybe knight f4 is a better idea. Knight f4 looks good, attacking the bishop. I suppose a downside is that king d2, my knight doesn't defend the c3 square, but I have enough support on that anyway, if bishop to b4 check. So knight f4, where does the bishop go? Well, if it goes to e6, obviously it can't go to either of these squares. If it goes to e6, I don't even think I want to take it, to be honest. I don't even think I want to take it, because that just helps black to get his pawns together and march forward, which is not what I want to allow. Bishop g7, however, does carry a bit of a hidden idea of hitting the d4 pawn. If the d4 pawn falls, I'm probably winning. My only issue is, if here, my knight is overloaded, right? And I'm probably losing a piece there. So I have to be very careful. Again, I'd love to do something like this, kick the rook over, and then go for this idea. But there's loads of tactics. Maybe like rook to e1 exists. There's also probably moves like d3 that exist. So I don't really want to allow any of that. So I think maybe king d2. I'm going to play it, which looks like a slow move. It does. But I'm connecting my rooks. I think I can just meet this with this. And after takes bishop c5, just knight d4, blocking everything up. And if the bishop drops back to try and make c5 happen, I don't think I need to be too concerned. I think at the very least I have moves like bishop to e3. Just shoring everything up. And we still have the pressure on h7 at all times. We're always threatening moves like rook to g7 potentially. We have to be a bit careful because black has the bishop pair. And again, if we were to play something like knight f4, bishop e6, knight e6, pawn e6, that pawn blob is a little bit scary. We're also low on time, 2 minutes 35 remaining. But there is a 10-second increment. So we should be able to ride the increment, but let's not use too much time unnecessarily if we can avoid it. Maybe my opponent wants to play something like rook e8, but then actually the rook gets trapped because it doesn't have the e8 square for itself. My opponent does go for this, and I think we should go c3. Of course, don't take back with the knight, because then d4 and you lose the knight. You can't counterattack with a3 because the pawn can take on c3 with check. So we have to take with the pawn. And to be fair, if we do get the exchange here, there are actually problems that black could encounter with his king's safety, because the b file opens up. Now the bishop could potentially block on b6, but then we may even have ideas of a4, a5, bishop e3 maybe, applying pressure to the bishop. But it's worth noting that opening the b file could weaken the black king. But then again, the d file is also starting to open up, which could weaken our own king. So it's difficult. Bishop d6 though, not a move I really considered. But can't we go for this now? If the king goes to d7, that might be the best idea. Maybe we should go bishop to f4 and offer a bishop trade. I think I like that. Because I don't want h2 to fall. Like, maybe we'd have moves like rook to h1 and just win a bishop in those sorts of lines. But long term, this bishop might come back to e6, and h2 could be a problem. So my bishop's already done its job on h6, I think. I don't really care if a rook goes to f8. That's completely pointless. So let's give the bishop a better job of getting itself exchanged. And if we have takes, then we will have a tempo on the bishop after moves like bishop to e6. Again, these ideas do exist with rook b1, but if bishop a6, I think the king just goes to d7, and then what are we doing? If we get a rook to g7, maybe we can apply pressure on the 7th rank, and king d7 may not be a good idea, but Don't give checks for the sake of it. Don't play hope chess and hope the opponent plays king to b8 after bishop to a6. Like, that is complete hope chess. Complete hope chess. Let's play solid moves. Let's play what we believe are the best moves. Because we also have time. We don't need to try and flag our opponent by playing something overly complicated. I've actually seen a few comments recently on my video saying like that I don't try to flag my opponents. I just try and play the best moves. And I think that that is definitely something that like a trap that people fall into. People, you know, they see their opponent gets low on time. They try and play complicated moves for the sake of it, just to try and get their opponent to think and then flag. In some scenarios, that can work. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's a completely useless tactic, but I think if your goal is chess improvement as well, which I think the majority of my viewers do want to improve at chess, I think that's their primary goal, then don't be trying to just flag your opponents. Like, what are you improving at? Like, how fast you can, like, make bad moves. Like, just play good moves. Play good moves as quickly as you can. If, you know, time is of the essence, of course, but just play good moves. I think that, you know, I think Bobby Fischer or something said something like, just play the best moves. Something along those lines, which is pretty funny. But there's a lot of truth to it. My opponent may be considering the move bishop to c5 here, counter-attacking my rook. And then, I mean, bishop e3 just invites a repetition, which makes no sense. So I think we probably play a move like rook g3 or rook g7. My opponent does go for it. I think I like maybe bishop e6 there. But then we can take on h7. Rook here. It's tricky. Let's go rook g7. I don't think I'm blundering anything. d4 we can just meet with c4 in most lines, because, of course, taking would be a horrific idea. Opening up the rook, allowing moves like bishop f4 to apply more pressure to our bishop. We don't want to do anything like that. If d4, c4 should be the move that you play instantly to lock everything down. Yes, it blocks off this diagonal, but bruv, there's bigger things to consider in this position. Far bigger things to consider. And yes, that will be a passed pawn. But my opponent, like, he's up 2 pawns, but he's down a piece. We need to use our pieces, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do here. I think bishop e6 may be the only move. Yeah, he goes for it. There's something to be said for knight d4, but I mean, I suppose, you know, c7 could hang in some of those lines. My opponent could take and go c5. We could double up on the g file. Whatever. I think we need to keep the momentum here. So I'm actually going to play knight d4, which also attacks c6. And yeah, I suppose if my opponent trades off his dart-squared bishop, we'd probably just win. Because we'll have the bishop pair, and my dart-squared bishop will be so powerful. Like, controlling so many important squares. And if it goes to e5, it'll be even more powerful. And at the end of the day, my opponent cannot allow this. The game will just be over because of the discovered checks on the king. Even if there weren't discovered checks, the game would probably still be over. So like that is not a move that can be played here. Rook c6 would probably just win a bishop, because bishop d6, we just take it. So I think he probably has to exchange. And then c5 isn't really a problem. I think we just take it. And the d file isn't opening up. The d file is not opening up. c6 also poses some problems to black's king's safety, because we take away the d7 square, which is something I mentioned before. Whoa. Really? Really? Huh. Well, here he has to take with the king, because the pawn is pinned, right? So knight here, king here, rook e1. King f6, bishop e5. That leads to some crazy lines. Yeah, no, surely we take that. We have to take that. The black king is going to get very stranded. This is completely losing, surely. I mean, if you're going to defend this knight, use a rook. Sorry, the bishop, then use a rook. That would make way more sense. This looks completely lost. because you can't play king f6 with an attack on my rook because of bishop e5, attacking the king and x-ray defending the rook. This has been a very, very exciting game. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. And it's not quite over yet, but I think it's about to be over because king e6 and bishop c7, or maybe not even bishop c7, but just bishop e5, for example. And yes, my opponent does resign here because there's nothing that he can do. Very, very interesting game. I really enjoyed that one. I hope you guys did too. Because that was really exciting. It looks like the computer thinks I made one mistake, so we'll find out what that was, whether it was a big deal or not. But let's get into the analysis and see what the computer has to say. Okay, so let's get into the analysis. By the way, if you want to learn more about the Vienna, particularly about the lines that follow knight f6 and f4, I have like an hour 20-minute video, like 1 hour and 20-minute video course on it on my channel. It's like full Vienna Gambit course or something like that. So check that out if you want to learn a lot more about it. But I also have a playlist linked below with every game on my channel in the Vienna Gambit or Vienna Game. So again, you can learn loads more about this opening if you're interested. But my opponent opts for knight to c6, the Max Lang defense, and bishop c4 is the main move here. Essentially, if black plays normal moves, we're going to try and build up for the move f4 and put a knight behind it. We never really take on e5. We want to encourage black to take us. And as you can see, white has a clear space advantage and has a very comfortable position. There's lots of things that black can do, like trying to chase away our bishop, maybe trying to make d5 work in the future, but it is difficult to make that happen. Putting pressure on our knight and trying to pin it to the queen, all common ideas. But our opponent opts for bishop to c5. And the way that you punish the move bishop c5 is with queen to g4. And we target the g7 pawn. And there's quite a few different things that black can do here. There's king to f8, just defending the pawn. That's not a ridiculous move because d5 is threatened by black, right, which would attack our bishop and our queen. d5 can't be played immediately because after queen g7, if you take my bishop, I'll take your rook, and your knight hangs at the end of the line, so you can't play that. Therefore, my opponent plays queen to f6. Also, there is g6, and then you have interesting lines after like queen f3, queen f6, for example, knight d5. This is a very common line that I get a lot of the time. And white essentially tries to exploit the weakness of the c7 square and the weakness of the dart squares around the king. Also, the fact that f7 can be weak in some of these lines. It's a queenless middle game, but it's quite comfortable for white. My opponent goes for queen f6, though. And the only way to punish this is knight to d5. You have to invite the queen into f2, go king d1, and play this position. And the thing is, there is only one move here for black that doesn't just lose immediately. There is one move. And it's king to f8. Just protecting g7. And lines get very interesting after like knight h3, queen d4, d3, threatening c3. This is a very common set of moves like knight f6, knight f6, pawn f6, bishop h6 check. There's loads of different things that can happen. Effectively, black is trying not to get mated. And he's trying to mate me, and I'm trying not to get mated, and I'm trying to mate black. Very, very exciting stuff. But there's also so many ways to go wrong in this position. And my opponent finds one of them, which is knight to f6. Now, the thing is, again, queen g7 is the only move that maintains an advantage for white. Any other move, and black is better. Like, for example, what if you take on f6? Then queen takes f6. And why is my king on d1? I have no threats. d5 is on the way with a double attack. I have to move my queen. And after something like d6, what am I doing? Black's going to castle. I can try and develop, but like a queen trade favors black. Black is up a pawn, remember? I gambited the f2 pawn. This doesn't work. So queen g7 is the only move, which is why it's given a great move. And the point is that you're attacking, you're attacking, you're attacking, you're attacking, you're attacking, and you're defending, and you're defending. There's so many moving parts in this opening that you need to be aware of at all times, because it's very easy for white to mess up. As we can see here, This is the only move. Everything else, white is lost. So queen g7. My opponent goes knight d5. Now, what else could my opponent have played? Well, if you play rook f8, you simply hang the f6 knight, right? It just hangs the knight. And the rook is under attack, so you have to save the rook. If you're going to... Well, no, sorry, that's the wrong thing. But, like, what am I trying to say? Basically, you are attacked twice, you need to do something about it. That was very weirdly worded. Anyway, my opponent goes knight d5, which is the best move. And, okay, so apparently white can get away with this, but the problem is the only move now is queen g8, and I actually do remember analysing this a while ago. The point is that, again, you need to defend g2, you need to defend the g4 square, and you're still applying pressure to the f7 square, because this could be a mating idea in the future. And I mean, the lines get very, very interesting after, like, knight cb4, and white is better, but again, it's very difficult to play. I thought that taking on d5 made a little bit more sense. The computer, it calls it an inaccuracy, but if you let it think, it actually does think that my move is better than taking on f8. Sorry, h8. Very slightly, very slightly. But I think in practical terms, this is an easier move, because, again, black is double attacked. And bishop f8 is playable, but, I mean, you win g2, I suppose. dc6, if you take my rook, I have queen e5. If the king moves, you're probably getting mated in a variety of ways. Here, 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 here. And if the king moves over, this is, of course, just mate. So, I mean, very, very tricky to play this with the black pieces. And, of course, it makes very little human sense to be retreating your bishop like this. So my opponent goes rook f8, which, I mean, looked like the only possible idea. And yeah, this is so interesting because, again, this is the only move that keeps it winning for white. The other move I was considering was knight to h3, just attacking the queen. But you can see the evaluation drop. I was initially concerned about queen to d4, counter-attacking my bishop, and after d3, the knight can move, although there's also b5, which is a mental move. But even if the knight just moves, like, I'm still better after this, apparently, and taking on e5. But there's so much more life in the game. And again, my king is very, very weak. Something like d6, I do have to be very concerned about. I probably have to run the king over here. So, I played the move dc6. I eliminate the knight, and I was expecting d takes c6, which the computer does think is the best move. And then I was going to take on e5, something like this, and then bishop e6 is actually playable. This, oh, that allows queen f1. And then you take on g2, I assume? No, you take like this and you defend this. And then this would be like very, very dubious. Very dubious. Maybe white is better in this endgame, but I don't know about that. I don't know about that. But my opponent goes d6, which I thought was very strange. I mean, I thought that this was probably his best opportunity. I don't think I was going to take on e5. I think I liked maybe knight to h3 or knight to f3. Even knight e2 makes sense here, which the computer doesn't like quite as much. But we block the diagonal, we develop the knight, we take away the d4 square from the queen. We still have this threat. Like, the queen can't just move willy-nilly because I will take on e5 with a double attack. But my opponent didn't go for that. He went for d6, which makes sense. I go knight e2. Knight f3 is slightly better, but I thought the knight was a little bit more secure on the e2 square. Personal preference. My opponent goes b takes c6, which, I mean, in practical terms, I thought wasn't the best because, I mean, the computer thinks it's the best move, but it's a bit slow. It's a little bit slow. The thing is, though, the computer's second favourite move is bishop to f5, but then I can just play queen g3, and as I mentioned during the game, the queen can't escape anymore. So the queen is forced to trade herself off, and I mean, how is black going to get back into the game? There's no way back into the game. So, bc6 makes sense, in fairness, but it is slow. And we go queen g3. d4 is actually the move, which I played later, of course. I suppose the queen also defends the d pawn, and after ed4... Okay, I was never ever going to play this in a million years. I assume the point is to open up the e-file and try and conduct some sort of mating attack on the black king. But to open up my king like this is very, very unhuman. Queen g3 is deemed an inaccuracy, but I disagree. I disagree entirely, because black is forced to retreat the queen. Because like the computer's favourite move here is d5, for example, but after queen f2, bishop f2, bishop b3, yes, black gets these pawns nice and strong in the centre, but black is only up one pawn. And how does he expect to get back into this game? Like, rook g8? G3? This? I suppose this is a bit of a problem. But, I don't know. I could maybe even try... Okay, no, that doesn't work. Oh, wow, there's actually mate threats now. Oh, my king. So maybe that was a good way to go about it, in fairness. But my opponent doesn't play that. No, we don't get this. My opponent goes queen f6, which is a far more logical way to approach the position, I think. You're down a piece, and my king is weak, so you should probably keep your queen on the board. Here I go queen f3. Again, not the best move. The computer again wants to move d4, and if takes, rook e1, wants to counterattack. But I'm just thinking, get the queens off the board ASAP. The queen can't move, because I will take on c6, and everything will fall apart. My rook can come to f1 as well. I can go d4 to open up my bishop, like with tempo. So black has to trade queens. And yes, it damages my pawn structure. But after d5... d4. I thought that bishop b3 was a bit too passive. I also thought bishop d3 blocked in my own bishop. So d4 is the best move, which I'm really happy I found. My opponent took here and I played bishop d3, but we did calculate the other options, like bishop takes, knight takes. If you do this, then I just move the knight, and I'm down two pawns, but I'm up a piece. And these pawns are terrible anyway. What else can black do? I mean, if you take here, I just take here, and white is clearly better. If you do this and I do this, and you do this, then I just do something like this. Again, white is clearly better, because black runs out of counterplay, really. So ed4 is definitely a more human way to approach the position. I go bishop d3. I gain two benefits from sacrificing my pawn. One, my bishop gets on a good diagonal and can't be blocked off with e4 in the future. Well, there's a few benefits, actually. I also close down the d-file forever, which we saw in the game remained closed forever. I also block the bishop's control of g1, which allows me to play rook g1, which is a move that I want to play. Here, I was kind of expecting rook g8 but then I think I can probably just go rook g1 anyway. And even though the computer doesn't love it, I exchange a pair of rooks, which can only be good for me. Can only be good. So bishop h3 is the best move. I go rook g1, which is the best move, because I was considering moves like bishop to f4, but then this looked a little bit dubious. I don't love that. So rook g1, queenside castle, bishop h6, rook h8, which I thought rook g8 may have to be played, even though it offers me a trade, and then king d2 was my idea to open up my rook's defense of my other rook, and then if we get exchanges, then perfect, that's exactly what I want. We're also threatening ideas of this, potentially. But rook h8 is a more human response, trying to keep more material on the board. And if I do something like bishop g7, I wasn't convinced this was good for me because of the move d3. And this looks a little bit terrifying. The computer says just take the pawn, and if this, then this, and if this, then this, and if this, then this. And there's no rook to g1 because my knight controls that square. Which makes sense, but why go into all those complications? No need. Just king d2, which I thought was a really smart move. Just preemptively connecting my rooks. And if bishop to b4 check, which is played, we just go c3. Takes, bishop is forced back. Now, I assumed my opponent would play bishop to c5 here. just to attack my rook, and then there's rook g7 and also rook to g3. Let's say rook g3, bishop back, and then I'll figure it out. Maybe I go rook to b1 and set up these ideas to force the king out into the open. Who knows? Again, knight d4 is another idea that can be played here, because if we get the trade, then, I mean, how is black going to try to come back here? But bishop d6, we go bishop f4. Computer prefers knight to f4, but trades are going to benefit me regardless. Bishop c5, avoiding the trade, a very human move. Rook g7, bishop e6. And don't play something like this, because if king b8, then, I mean, fantastic. We can get this kind of thing. Although, of course, there is bishop to b6, and we can maybe go for this, we can maybe go for this. But I assumed on bishop to a6, black just goes king d7, and it doesn't really work. Of course, black did that in the game after knight to d4, but here it's different, because we can take on e6 and force the king out into the open. Rook e1, king f6, and then the dagger that ends the game. I mean, the computer goes, oh, just go rook g4, that's also fine. But bishop e5 is clearly the cleanest way to go about this. Either the king goes to e6, and there's mating ideas, apparently. If the king goes back to f6, rook g4, and apparently there's mates brewing. Yeah, sure. I mean, realistically, if king to e6, I probably would have just played a move like this and just won another exchange. Like, that's a far more human approach. And if king to e7, then again, we can just go for this. Or, I don't know, there's so many ways to win this position. Even bishop f4 wouldn't be bad if the king retreats, bishop h6. But just keep things simple. Like, why are you overcomplicating things? If the king goes back here, we can take on h7. The rook is hanging. We can even play a move like this. And the king can come here to defend the bishop. But we could even just do something like this and win a bunch of pawns and get the rooks to the 7th rank. But my opponent resigns because, I mean, there's nothing left. There's nothing left to do here. The king is stranded, and I'm going to have all kinds of discoveries in this position. So a very interesting Vienna game, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see another very nice Vienna game, then check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, then have a look at the playlist down there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.